Welcome to the Curious Builder podcast. I'm Mark Williams, your host, and today I'm joined with Kim Senn from Senn & Sons. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you. This is so exciting to be on the podcast.
I know. So yeah, tell us a little bit about your background and
Sure.
kind of, what has brought you up to be this brand titan.
A titan. I love it. I'm a mogul. So I started my career in creative agencies, sort of all over the place. So my first job was actually in Minneapolis. Then I moved to New York, worked at Fallon in New York, and then transferred to Fallon in London for a couple of years and worked there. And so while I was at Fallon London, I was actually working more on the business side of things. So account management, account strategy, on Orange Mobile. If you've ever traveled in Europe, you've probably heard of it, and a couple of other European brands. But that agency was actually Agency of the Year, named by Campaign Magazine for the 2 years that
of the
I was
world
in, maybe in Europe.
Okay.
I don't know. Campaign is a UK publication, so
Yeah.
I don't really know. But it was Agency of the Year, which was a huge honor.
Yeah.
And so I was there during that bit of that agency's life, and it was really exciting. And I feel like being surrounded by some of the best in the business, there's just so many learning opportunities, whether it's the bosses that I had, the creatives that I worked with, the clients that I had, that so many of whom I'm still in touch with, just building those relationships. And then when we were in London, kind of got sick of the rain and the cold weather. And so
it's not just a stereotype. It's actually,
it's real. It's an amazing place. It's
Yeah.
so much fun, but then moved to California and spent some time in San Francisco, which nobody warned us was actually like foggy and cold,
right.
like London. So,
That's funny. My wife actually did her residency in San Fran.
oh yeah.
And so I spent a year going there every month because that was in our dating courtship
my
style.
gosh.
And I'm not a big fan of cities, other than I love all European cities basically because they're old. But I think what I love about San Francisco is everything's on a hill. So I like the view and that temperature. I mean, I'm from Minnesota, right? And I actually embrace the cold. So it's pretty much 55 to 70 year round in San Francisco. I'm like, this is my weather.
Well, and you can be outside every single day, no matter what.
Mhm.
Like, it's not warm. It's not necessarily sunny every day, but it's definitely like you're outside every single day. And I think it's one of the most beautiful cities. It's amazing. So my husband and I were there for like 7 years. It's where both of our kids were born. Worked at an agency called Cutwater there, which was sort of it was a part of TBWA Chiat for a while and then broke off. So another kind of big agency brand, but was there for a couple of years and then left to have children. And so
did you guys move back to Minnesota then?
Yes, right. Right after our second son was born.
Okay.
Moved back to Minneapolis. So that was 10 years ago now.
Wow.
So, but that was sort of my agency life. So that was, building big brands, worked on Ray-Ban, NVIDIA, LensCrafters, Brawny paper towels, Virgin Mobile, like really big brands. So was able to learn a lot just from these huge companies and all very kind of authentic brands, like brands you've heard of that have spent all this time building them.
You worked on Disney too, I read.
And Disney, Disney Parks and Pictures.
Oh,
so
my.
That was fun. So going down to Burbank frequently for those meetings. And I feel like there's some exciting stuff that happens when you're working in Disney Pictures. You get advanced scripts and like,
of like a movie coming out because you have to, I get it. Because you have to brand. I mean, it's whether it's the action figures or the Legos or it's all in concert together.
Yeah. So you get the advanced scripts and then you work with some of the voiceover talent because a lot of it's animated. But you get your script and your name is like printed on it. So you can't, like, if it gets lost or redistributed or if somebody makes a copy, like your name is on it. Like you feel sort of nervous, like I can't lose the script.
It's a little bit, don't they say like a playbook for like an NFL team, right?
Yeah.
Like this is your book. If you lose it, like that's on you.
It's on you. Yeah. And they'll for sure sue you for it. So
oh really?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, that's why they do it. Like the agencies, like everybody's personal name. You're like, oh my gosh. So anyway,
I would be like, you know what the football is? The president has all the nuclear codes in it.
Yeah,
and it has like it's like one of their Secret Service agents. It carries it right next to the president. And then they have a handcuff where it's handcuffed to the briefcase so that, you'd have to, it's a little morbid, cut off their arm. But I'm like thinking like this folder anyways, where I'm thinking of this is like, I would never want to lose this folder and get sued by Disney because you're probably going to lose that battle.
You don't like leave it on your desk. You just have to like have it.
Just hold it all the time.
Yeah.
I hope it's branded and it looks good.
I mean, it's just a script. Like it's crazy. It's just like a stack.
But can't you have it like a nice leather embossed folder? I mean, didn't you?
I mean, you could. I didn't.
Right.
I just had a stack of papers and I'm not that organized. So it was fine. Anyway, so that was a fun
little tangent. So before we dive into what you're doing now, I'm just very curious about the corporate setting, just being a small entrepreneur and you obviously will talk about the differences between a big agency and a small agency in a little bit, but a lot of our listeners are small entrepreneurs as well, or maybe there's someone out there who wants to, start a business. Walk us through a little bit about this agency. Like, let's say a client like Disney comes to you, or Ray-Ban. Like, how big is your team? Like, how much have you gleaned from that agency that you now have harnessed into your own, boutique design firm and branding firm? Walk us through kind of that process. If it's the same, it's just the clients are different, or
it's similar. I would say that it's actually, I don't know. I feel like I'm taking a lot of learnings just because I learned how to solve problems at the agency. It was basically solving big brand problems, solving just executional problems, how to take a creative idea from being just an idea into making it happen through all the different layers. So how to protect those ideas, how to work things kind of through the process, the various resourcing questions, basically like, how do we even get this done? I always say like my superpower is resourcefulness. And it's a little bit like,
I saw that on your website. I was like, I love that.
But it makes sense because it's a little bit like when you come up with an idea and you have tons of ideas, I have tons of ideas. How do you make something like that happen? And so that's the stuff that I learned from the agency. As far as, the business now and Senn & Sons, I definitely work with smaller clients. I mean, sometimes I'll work with a bigger brand on a campaign. But really, I like to apply what I learned on those big brands, which is just really staying true to finding your values, your mission, your vision. Every size business needs all of those things really defined. I think we worked through this on the Mark D. Williams brand, where it was just like, what do you really care about? Who is your primary customer? Who do you want to work with? And then you build a brand that will attract those people and keep them there. And so I think it's all of those things, how to understand that, what questions to ask, sort of the process. Those are all the things I learned in big agencies. Like, I think knowing what questions to ask is really, really important in this process. And so that's what I do.
Something that I found very valuable in our process, and, I tend to have a lot of energy and a lot of ideas, and I need somebody. And I think it's good to have those generation of ideas, but I need someone like you, a partner that is going to help me pare those down and basically isolate it to like, what are the best? And even like when you go through your website gallery and you're like, well, I'm proud of all the homes I've built. They're not quite the same as obviously children, but you're proud. It's like if you had 100 children, it's not like you're proud of one more than the other, but like, there are certain ones that you would celebrate. And so like, on your gallery, like dropping out some of the homes that you did 10 years that maybe no longer fit your brand. And again, I've kind of built my career around where our clients have taken us. And, our first home, let's say, was $500,000. And, a couple homes we built last year were 4 million. I mean, totally different, right? However, the clientele has really brought us there. I mean, our commitment to quality and some of those things have never really wavered. It's just that what the client is willing to pay for and what the client wants now is different. And so I've always gravitated towards that. And so for me, and I don't know if all brands are this way, but I've essentially kind of organically gone to this different place. And, sometimes it's fun to look backwards. Even, I mean, it's already been 19 years, which is hard to believe, because in some ways I feel like I'm starting over. Right. I feel like in the last 2 to 4 years, I feel like my clientele, the homes I built, even the brand, like even now having an old brand, I look at my new brand, I'm like, ooh, I feel like a new company. I mean, it's very exciting. It's like buying a new car, getting a new house. The new brand is very invigorating. Totally. Do you find that that's the case with most people when they go through rebranding? It kind of like is a shot of espresso. Well,
and a lot of times it's companies that like their branding needs to catch up with where they are.
Yeah. Okay.
So when you're coming to it, a lot of times I work with clients who are at that transition point where it's like, my brand doesn't actually fit the clients I'm working with, or you've expanded,
which is
offerings.
What mine was.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Where it feels like it's just disconnected somehow, where it's like, well, it worked for me up to this point, but there's either something new happening, or I feel like a lot of companies will have, a brand that's very localized, but they're going national, and they've got, I don't know, there was a company that I worked with that had Minnesota in its name, but it was working with national clients. And so they needed a rebrand because it was like, well, it's not just Minnesota companies. And so there's some point of inflection where I feel like people know that it's like, this isn't quite jiving. I need something that feels like it matches. So it's like catching up a little bit to your actual business.
One of the things I suspect a lot of people when they start their company, I mean, well, I could speak for myself. I did not think about branding. I didn't think about marketing. I certainly wouldn't have named my company Mark D. Williams Custom Homes. It seems very unoriginal. And at that point, after 20 years, we can talk, I guess, now a little bit about, that evolution. I'm sure a lot of business owners have this. And I would love to go back in time and sit down with a brand strategist. How many of the companies that you counsel, how many actually start from the place of brand first versus somebody like myself that just, hey, I'm going to go into business. I don't, I'm going to go it, kind of the fake it till I make it, or just I have the resources and I've got a lot of energy. I'm just going to go, which there's pros and cons to both, frankly. Your expertise, which 50-50 is what's the ratio? Do you think people actually lay out a brand, a path before they ever start the company?
Well, people I work with typically haven't started with brand. They start with their service or their actual expertise. And then they come to the brand later. And I think that's just the nature of what I do. People are like, I need a brand. I know who to call. So if somebody already has a brand or they started there, I'm not typically the first call. But so most of the people I work with do what you did. I think unless you come from the marketing and branding
you
world,
wouldn't even know to ask that question.
No. Yeah. You come into that when you learn that like, oh, this would be a little bit better or a little bit more right if it was better branded or had better messaging.
Which is unique because obviously the podcast that we're on right now, the Curious Builder podcast, was, that derived. I mean, we started this, I was on a podcast in August and we launched this podcast basically in September. And then 4 months later, we started airing it. But I mean, you were there for the creative. So it was almost like a separate it is a separate business that essentially had a brand established off of Mark D. Williams Custom Homes. But so seeing that evolve, spin off of that, how often do companies that you work with kind of spin off a side company that where you have to match the branding and the voice?
Yeah, a lot, actually. That's something that I'm working on with a number of clients right now, where they kind of have their core brand, but then they have other ideas and other businesses or a program that needs to be branded or something. And so a lot of times it's figuring out, and I'd call this like a brand architecture, basically. So it's a little bit like, how do you approach it? There's a lot of different ways. It could be kind of separate but sister brands. Like I think the Curious Builder and Mark D. Williams, they share a color palette, they share a little bit of a vibe, and at the same time they're different brands and they are kind of different businesses. And I'm working with another woman who's a consultant who has that, where she sort of consults with large companies like Ecolab and huge companies, and it's very corporate, and she's got a consulting arm, but then she also has consulting for people going through career transitions that needed a little bit more personal touch. And so we named it and we branded it, and it's familiar and it all fits in the same family. So there's a lot of clients that come to me with questions about that kind of stuff too. Like, how do I even approach this? I have this idea. Is it an extension of my main brand? Is it a totally different brand? Like, do I need another Instagram handle? I feel like that's the question. Like, is it another business?
Right.
So
yeah, and they kind of play together. And I want to go down there, but one of the questions I wanted to ask that I actually don't know the answer. Where did Senn and Sons? Where did you get that name from? Because we're just talking about naming and branding, and it got me back to it. Like, how did you derive your company name?
Well, a long list of ideas. My husband is actually a writer, and so we sat down together, and I didn't like any of his ideas. This was 12 years ago, 11 years ago. I don't even know. But we went through this list. I mean, we went like Corn-Fed Collective was on there, and I was like, I don't really like that. Like, I don't know. We had
was that your husband's idea?
Probably mine because it's terrible. But it was, it's.
I'm thinking of Nebraska, like a farmer, like
I know, right?
A co-op of selling corn cobs to.
Well, it was in California and from the Midwest. It was like, okay, what is this? And then it was like, all right, fine. We're just going to use our name. So this is my married name. Senn is my married name, and we had one son. And I thought, well, Senn and Son doesn't sound as good as Senn and Sons. Yeah. So let's gamble. Yeah. And like just went with it. And so he was one when I started this business. And so we went with it. And then a couple of years later, we had another son. It was like, oh, perfect. Yes. This is great.
The apostrophe F is now solidified.
Like, how are we going to explain this to a daughter if we have this?
That's actually pretty funny.
Yeah. We have to rebrand. That's it. Oh my gosh, what do we do? So anyway, it fit and it stuck. And I've just sort of stuck with it. And I've been able to sort of modify my business and what I offer and what I do because the name doesn't really say anything other than my name.
Yeah. So. How does you had mentioned, like, even in the title of your website title, design and brand, what is the difference between design and brand? I think I have some ideas, but I'd like to hear it from the professional.
Sure. No, it's a great question. I think brand to me is kind of the total experience that you get when you work with a company. It's sort of course, it's how it looks. From a design standpoint, what kind of visuals you have, the type that you use, all of those things can create emotions and feelings. And then brand is just going deeper. It's what you stand for. who you serve, sort of the mission behind things, and the overall expression. So the copy, the messaging pillars, what you focus on. I think brand to me is sort of this idea of like the front door of a house, where it's like you come and you're like, oh, this place seems like it's for me. And you want to attract the right kind of people into it. And so brand is sort of the whole thing. It goes down to like the tone of your emails that you send. And
like you hear that phrase a lot. That's on brand.
That's on brand.
Right.
Yeah,
you hear that phrase a lot.
Right. Because it's sort of like if you think of brand like a person or a personality, it's like, would that brand say that?
Right.
Do they have ownership over that? Like, can they claim that kind of stuff? You know, so you think of big brands like Apple's always an interesting one. I think Trader Joe's is always weird and fun too, because it's sort of quirky. It's a massive business, but it's got a really strong brand. Like, you know what you're going to get, even down to like the checkers being a little too chatty. It's like, you know, like that's part of their brand.
That's
like,
funny.
Their brand is to have those conversations and make small talk with people who are going through the line.
Right.
So it's the whole experience. Whereas design, I think, is the expression of that.
Interesting. What do you feel? I mean, you obviously your superpower is resourcefulness, which is interesting. You'd be a great general contractor, because I feel like, you know, not knowing the answer, but knowing where to get the answer, probably actually in any business is probably a great superpower to have, frankly.
Well, I mean, that's actually a good comparison, because I feel like when I have a project, it's like, what are the resources that I need to make this come to life? So for instance, like we did some animations with your logo in the launch, and it's like, okay, I know an animator. I'm going to bring in, we have so much talented freelance. We have so many talented freelancers in the city that it's like, okay, I'm going to call in my animator. I'm going to call in a web developer, because we have some custom stuff that we're going to do here. Yeah. And it's like, who do I need? When do I need them? What's the process?
Actually, it's funny you say that, because I was actually trying to create an analogy, because I just love speaking in analogies, I guess.
You love metaphors.
And I do. And, but, you know, it's very much like even general contracting, right? So like we have our team is 5 employees, but really we employ hundreds of trade partners. And, you know, most general contractors do. It'd be very rare to have all those under one umbrella. For what you just illustrated, like, hey, you know, I need a glass guy, I need a plaster guy, you know, I need, you know, this craftsmanship, I need to bring this talent in. So you have 2 employees. Is it you and Lauren, or how is your?
Yeah, it's me and Lauren, and Lauren is a contractor as well.
Yeah.
So she's come in recently to really help with the business and operations side of things, and kind of managing projects and keeping me on track. I feel like I'm the person who's like going to work on this and kind of dive deep into this. And she's like, okay, these are the priorities. These are the things that must get done. So she's the heavy. She makes me stay on track. And so that's been awesome, because I think there's a challenge with what I was doing on my own, which is sort of like being the business person, but then also being the creative person, where those feel very different. You kind of go into different brain spaces. When I'm in creative mode, I shut everything else off and sort of dive deep for hours, which means I'm not responding to emails. I'm not thinking about timelines. I'm not getting
right. Because you sort of have to, that creative process needs its space, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
How long did you operate where you were the creative and business director solely in one? Because Lauren just came on recently, right?
Oh, 10 years.
So 10 years.
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty rare air. I mean, my sister-in-law is a very talented artist. And in fact, yesterday I was just talking, you know who Drew Beeson is? I'm going to have him on the podcast. He's an artist, and he's been very successful artist. I call him an entrepreneur. Yeah, I'm sure someone else has coined it, but it was fun to say. And but we were just chatting literally yesterday. He came up to me at the gym and he saw my bright fluorescent pink shirt. On brand or not, it's very catchy.
Very on
neon brand. And matches my personality, I guess. Sorry. And anyway, we were just talking about how hard it is to be an artist, but also to have a business, because there's that stereotype that that people that are great at art aren't good at business, and people that are good at business aren't good at art. And that stereotype does have some foundation to it. But it's interesting. Walk me through a little bit of how you were able to compartmentalize your creativity, but then kind of hit time out and be like, I still have a business to run too, because that's a little bit more black and white, running in the lanes, where, you know, color, you know, kind of the color aspect of creation.
Right.
How did you navigate that for a decade?
Carefully. I feel like, so it's interesting, because when Senn and Son started, it was very art focused. It was just art. I was doing painting. Like I was painting original paintings for people's homes. And so I kind of abandoned the entire agency experience, because I felt like I needed to get my hands dirty. I felt like I needed that creative outlet. So while I was working at agencies and the business side of things and strategy, I was taking life drawing classes after work. And so I was like carrying my huge like sketchbook and going and doing these drawing classes and getting it out that way. And at some point after having kids, it was a little bit like agency life was hard for me, just from a commitment standpoint. It was like a lot of hours, a lot of last minute travel. And so having my first child was very much like a wake up call, where it's a little bit like, I need to get this creative energy out. And so when Hugo, my first son, turned 1 is when I started Senn & Sons, and I just started painting and I just started selling on Etsy. I mean, this business has taken a lot of turns,
right?
But it started there and then sort of grew into creating surface pattern designs, which is basically any kind of printer pattern that you see on products, whether it's planners, fabrics, wall coverings, tech cases, all of those things. And so I took that art practice and started licensing my art to companies. So then that art, so it's very, the birth of it was very much art based.
Mm-hmm.
And then I actually just kind of started applying the skills that I knew from agency life and marketing and branding to sort of build this business.
So you didn't have a master plan when you left the agency to create what you are now?
I did not. Yeah. No, this was not part of the master plan, in fact.
So you didn't do you didn't do a brand word search like you did for me, for yourself?
I did not. No, I just, and it's fine. Like maybe now I should have a plan, but it very much, I let it evolve organically. And I think when you're, growing a family at the same time you're growing a business, you sort of have to like lean in and lean out as necessary.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah. And then I think somebody heard that I knew how to do branding and was like, can you do it for me? And I was like, fine. And so now I have an agency, even though that wasn't necessarily where it started.
Now the Senn & Sons that I know, how long have you been, let's call it, this jet plane of a brand? Last couple of years?
Couple of years, yeah. Okay. So I moved the business out of the home almost 2 years ago now. And so I feel like that was sort of the inflection point of saying like, okay, this is going to be a thing and I should be a little bit more intentional about it, think about what it is. But yeah, probably the last couple of years.
Okay. I find personally, I don't know if you can relate to this, but I find, a lot of people work from home, and obviously when we all start, that's kind of everyone's origin story as a business owner. You want to keep your overhead low. But for myself, I really try to divide work and business to the best of I can. I mean, it does bleed in. I think people often looking on, an entrepreneur's life or a business owner, I think people only choose to see a portion of it. But and there's the other stereotype where people work too much and then they can't, back to your point, leaning in, leaning out. And so I've found that, and actually being married has helped me a ton, just respecting my spouse and our family and kind of getting some points of view from her. And then I think that's really helped me even define the business, not only from another idea, or another person giving you good ideas that knows you intimately, but also understanding like your business actually thrives when you set boundaries, which is surprising actually.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally agree. I think finding that balance, and whether you call it balance or something else, I feel like everybody struggles with it.
It evolves. I think it's continual.
Yes.
I think it's like juggling. You have 3 balls in the air for right now. It's working. You know what? And 1 second from now, one of them might not work.
Well, and I do think like when we're talking about like we launched the Curious Builder and the new brand at the same time, like kind of on the same day. Why not do it all at once? But I do think there's a little bit of like, that was a busy work week.
Yeah.
Well, the next week, then we were able to sort of back off a little bit and like re-engage with family. So I do think, just depending on the project,
it's ebbs and flows.
Right.
I mean, you're right. I mean, obviously it takes, let's say we build a, high-end home. Let's say it takes, I think people don't understand that a lot of times it takes, let's say 4 to 6 months just in design. It could take a year depending on how high-end the home is. And then the build could take anywhere from a year to 2 years just to build it. And so you definitely get into this pattern of this rhythm, and there'll be times where it's very frenetic and it's just all hands on deck. And then, they'll be painting for 2 months. And like, okay, well, we can, enjoy your vacation.
Right.
We'll check back in a little bit. So anyway, it's just interesting how business does have a ebb and flow, and I like to time block, and maybe we can talk a little bit about, kind of our schedules a little bit about how you manage this. I think you had even mentioned before you came on, we were chatting just early mornings, how much we love the quiet. Do you tend to do your creative work early in the morning? Do you do your business stuff in the morning? How do you structure your day, basically to handle some of these responsibilities? Or is it not necessarily a time of day? You just chunk out time?
I chunk out time. I sort of have to go with where my energy is.
Yeah.
The mornings are really great because they're quiet. So I feel like I can get a handle on my day, respond to emails, do kind of a lot of the admin stuff and just thinking through things. A lot of times I'll do strategy writing in the mornings just because that's when I'm freshest and the coffee's the strongest. So it's like that's when I can do a lot of the thinking and planning. And then creative work sort of needs just open space. Like I can't have bumpers on my day. So if I have meetings throughout the day, I won't be able to do creative work. So if I need to do creative work, I just have to clear the decks.
Will you block off like a day, like 2 days, like a week? Like, so you'll just like, and then you'll just protect that time.
Yeah.
Like it's just this 2 days is non-negotiable.
Yep.
This is free. Now, just because I'm a huge admirer of design. So, and just of the creative process, I get a lot of my ideas like running or exercising, or frankly, the time that I time block to be away from work is where I generate all the ideas.
Yes.
Like I'll be, I like to run. And so I'll be doing a trail run and, I'll be an hour in and I'll be listening to a podcast. I'm like, I gotta turn this thing off because the ideas are just flowing. So half the time I'm calling my project manager. I'm sure I've called you running and I'll just be like, I'm sure it's like weird, this person's heavily breathing, just like, okay, I got this great idea. And anyway, did you find that free space for you is that very common for just the arts in general?
I think so. I mean, a lot of times it's like, I feel like with creativity, there's sort of this myth of like just inspiration hitting. And a lot of times it is that like you have to create space and you have to just try things. So for my process, I'll sit down and I know I have 4 hours to work on something and I'll just start playing around with things. And most of it gets scrapped. And then I'll be mad at myself and think, oh, I'm terrible at this. I got to start over. And then I'll go for a walk and come back. And somehow all those things synthesize. Yeah. That's like, okay, now it's better. But yeah, I feel like creating space, whether it's going for a walk or getting out of your norm, is what allows those ideas to come in and things to sort of start to gel a little bit. I'm the same way. But a lot of times it's a little bit like I do have to sit down and almost kind of force myself to do bad ideas a little bit, just to like,
you just have to start somewhere. Like you just have to start.
The blank page is the end.
Do you start with like hand sketching, like hand drawing? Do you start with like writing? Because one thing what attracted me to your brand when I first saw it, and I think what attracted Melissa to it, my wife, was just your color. Like, and I assume it's intentional, but like it's very bold, it's bright. There's reds, there's yellows, there's these grabby colors but they're all very, like the palette is just very, it's not erratic. It's not like a rainbow and it's not like an explosion. It's just like, hello. And it's very bright and it's very color. And I was like, I love color. And I was just like, having my past type fonts and everything which I love blue, but it's like blue and white or black. And like seeing all this like explosion of color, I'm like, yes. But then when we work through the process, your writing skills, like when I talk to people about your skills, I'm blown away at your writing ability. And when we did this, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about this now, about how you actually do a brand or walk us through your process. Like you sit down with me or whoever's listening to this podcast, they reach out to you and say, well, I think people would love to understand like how you do it. But just to complete this thought, like your writing is incredible because I'm not a strong writer. And when I saw you kind of describe things that I was visualizing in words, I was just like, wow, she gets it.
Yeah, I think, and I think people have different skills. Like I'm going to talk through things, but the way I process things and the way I think is actually through writing. So I studied journalism in college. And so I sort of really latch on to storytelling. And I love to just listen and capture and try to understand what people are saying that they're not saying out loud. And so it's a little bit like just hearing different things. So I love writing. Thank you for that compliment. That's very nice. But
it's true.
That's how I process things. Okay. And so, I'll sound like I don't really know what I'm talking about, but if I write the same exact thing, to be like, oh, that makes total sense.
That's funny. I'm not sure I ever know what I'm talking about, but I think the opposite is true. I think I'm much better at ad lib. Like in general, I think the reason the podcast works for me better, like if I was to write a script, I mean, I have questions here and I haven't looked at it because I can't go off a script. Right. I'm way better at reacting and ad libbing. It's interesting that your creative process then is it the fact that you're writing it and you think internally, like how is it that writing you're able to interpret it that way, or that's just a gift?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know the answer.
I think that's fair.
I think so. And sometimes it comes really easily. And sometimes it's a little bit like, oh, I'm not really sure how to communicate this. So I think sometimes it ebbs and flows. And I think I balance that with like thinking in pictures. So I can picture things. And if I can picture it, then I can write it a little bit. So it sort of all connects.
Let's go. I think people would be really interested in hearing this. So let's say a company comes to you which they will tomorrow. Actually, this morning, right?
Yeah,
My carpet installer was very impressed with my logo, right? And then I was like, and you can see I'm a shameless salesman, and like caps, like go for it, and I love the fact that he was responding to branding in my email, and so I said, you've got to talk to Kim and Lauren, and you've got to get it. So we'll see where that goes. But so those listening, they walk us through this process. So you probably do a 15-minute vetting call just to talk with them a little bit. Walk us through, you sit down with them, walk us through your process. They want to do a brand refresh. Okay. Let's say they already have a brand, but it's been a while.
Yeah. Okay. So we start by having that discovery call, that conversation that basically just allows us to get to know each other. It allows me to sort of hear where their pain points are, the struggles that they're having with their current brand or website or whatever it is. And then they get to hear a little bit more about my approach and how I do things. And so it's just a sort of like, this is going to work. Like, this is going to be fun. Because I really like to work with people who believe in the power of branding and creativity. I don't really want to have to sell what I do. It needs to be, we're partners and collaborators in this process. So I want you to be fully engaged.
Do you feel like it's a connection or a relationship in the sense that, like, oftentimes when I'm building somebody's home, I often tell people, like, this is a relationship because, you kind of have, not everyone has to be like your person, as they like to say, but obviously it helps when you connect with them. You can kind of see them. How often do people actually meet with you? I can't imagine someone not like wanting to be like either your friend or being like, wow, I just connect with you. How often do people are like, this doesn't work for me?
Yeah, usually it comes down to sort of timing, budget. I think, I don't know, or they just feel like maybe they think they know everything and they're not open to new ideas. I think there's a lot of reasons, and sometimes it's purely logistical. But other times it really is like they'll get through it and they'll say, well, I'm not really sure I need this. It's like, that's fine. You don't need it right now. Come back when you're ready. Like I want to work with people who are ready.
Understood.
And I also think I can tell if somebody's going to be really open and honest. I feel like this works best if you could just tell me everything. Feel like,
so you actually, I actually wondered about that. Somebody like myself, and I don't have feelings, so you can say whatever you want here. but false. Like, false. But like, my point is like, I have a lot of ideas, right? Is that overwhelming because I communicate too many ideas and they're all over the place, or the fact that I'm putting that much that is like, okay, there's just a lot to work with. How do you interpret that? Just like this explosion of ideas, is that normal? Is that not normal? Versus the person that you feel like you have to draw stuff out of because they don't share anything. I tend to be probably an oversharer, would be my guess.
Yeah, I mean, we could do both. I like to be able to draw things out and ask the right questions, and at the same time, like, having lots of ideas is never a bad thing. It's just a matter of saying, like, being able to really identify priorities and say, well, what's our goal? Which one of those ideas? Which two of those?
Because I feel like it would be overwhelming. Like I know that I can overwhelm people. Especially in this sense, because it's like I like everything. It's like hard.
Well, and I think we had the conversation early on where I was like, okay, hold on to those things, because first we have to do this. And I think sometimes it's a little bit like branding helps create a filter. Like what to do, what not to do. Like, does this idea even make sense with the new brand? So it's a little bit like, hold that thought. And like I said, when I go into my like creative hidey hole, it's a little bit like, shush, everyone. Like, in now, that sort of
artist at work.
A little bit, like put the sign up on the door, like recording the red light outside. It is a little bit like new ideas aren't helpful at certain stages. And at the same time, knowing that you're going to bring a lot of ideas is actually part of your brand. That I feel like you come with ideas and excitement and kind of an energy that feels like it has to be a part of your brand, because if it's not, it's going to feel inauthentic in some way. So, I mean, it tells me something about you as a person. And also, like, we then just got to know each other quickly, because it was like, okay, what about this? What about this? And so to me, it felt like sometimes that process is quick and easy. And sometimes it's like, I got to draw some more things out. I don't think I'm getting the whole story. What else do I need to know?
Because it was interesting. I think it's analogous to actually, again, a home design.
It really is.
Because like, I'll meet with usually it's the missus, and she'll have, hey, here's my Pinterest board. I have 10,000 photos, and they're just so excited to share you. And every builder and designer can relate to this. And we laugh because it's true, and it is helpful to a point, but it also is like, you have 10,000 photos. They are not all, they're not even,
Right.
you cover the gambit of everything. Like
Right.
we need to pare this thing down to like 10 photos or 20 photos. So I
Totally.
imagine it's a little bit like those initial meetings.
Totally.
So back to so someone sits down with you now, walk us through that process. So it's an hour meeting, I'm guessing. And they're just telling you about their business. Like what happens in that first meeting?
Yeah. So that first meeting is sort of just identifying what are their goals,
Mhm.
what are their problems. I like to know sort of what problems they're trying to solve, just because that helps me say like, well, here's what I think might help with that. And then I can put together a proposal for them that says, this is the conversation that we had. This is the position your business is in.
Mhm.
This is where you want
And
to
this is your
be.
path
Yeah,
forward
and
to
this is your
change
path
it.
forward.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so then I'll put together the proposal and say, this is about how long it's going to take.
Yep.
This is about how much it's going to cost. This is sort of my plan to get us there.
Yep.
How's that sound?
Yeah.
You know, and most
Yep.
people are like, okay, well, yes or no on this, or, you know, that's not fast enough, or,
Yep.
you know, there are some dates. I try to get as much information as possible up front. So those proposals feel like, yes, that works. That's exactly what we talked about.
Mhm.
And then we just get started.
Yep.
And then, you know, I send over a list of questions. It's a little bit, I feel like clients always approach this differently. Like I'll send this list of questions and some people are like, they pick up the phone and they're like, okay, let's just talk this through. And other people will, I do this like I'm 100 years old.
Do you know that they've done tests where people don't even know what this means?
I'm sure, like,
For those not who are listening, if you go to our YouTube channel or the curiousbuilderpodcast.com, you can see what we're talking about. But basically just holding up your hand and the thumb and pinky. The young kids don't even know what that means. Yeah, I guess. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, so some people just pick up the phone and call. Some people will respond with a novel. Some people will literally not do anything until our meeting and be like, oh, I haven't even thought about this. So there's a lot of different ways, but it's a way to start thinking about the business and start kind of, you know, using language, thinking about the audience. I like to ask about, who are your main customers? Who are they now? Who do you want them to be? What services do you offer? Are they changing that? You know, we talk about core values a lot. It's a little bit like, what do you value? Let's talk about that. Let's see like where things lead to.
What I loved about it going through the process recently is I felt like, because I love personality tests.
Yes.
I felt like you did that. I don't even know what you call it. It was like a Venn diagram of my personality. Yes. And leads into my next question. How many companies, like I am the brand, right? Mm-hmm. Mark Williams is the brand of Mark D. Williams Custom Homes. I wanted to ask you a follow-up question on that in a minute. And so that part, you know, is like, just because I am the company, the brand of what I do and everything kind of associates a lot with my personality. That was another one of the things that was like, oh, that's very interesting. How many of the companies that you work with would the principal person or the CEO or the founder be the brand themselves?
So far, just a couple.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's usually consultants. Because that kind of has to, but even some consultants that I'm working with now are developing a brand. They're moving away from it being their person because they want to bring in additional consultants and other help and people who can
scale it.
Yeah, to scale it. But not that many.
Oh, interesting.
You know, service providers are usually the ones who have their name or their person connected to it. And a lot of times I talk to people about that because I feel like, coming back to the conversation about balancing work and life, I think some people are ready to sort of say, that's my work. It needs to be separate from who I am.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what led me to you originally, right? So I've often contemplated a name change, and with the idea that, you know, I've been building for 19 years, I'm 42, you know, maybe I'll make it, God willing, to 60. Hopefully my kids don't want to be in the building because then I'll have to be in it longer, but you just don't know what the future is going to hold, right? And it's a very difficult business, but I do love it. It's kind of it's just kind of an interesting business, and maybe all businesses like that. And so for me, it was like, I really wish I had named it something else and not my own name. And what started is like, my name is just so long to get fit on marketing and for it to be concise. And so you really helped me with that. But anyway, we went through probably a 2-month period where we went through names and it's like nothing. And we got it narrowed down to 2. I don't remember offhand what they were. And I just remember, I think it was like Rooted Custom Homes. And that was one of them. And anyway, it doesn't matter because the idea is, at the end of the day, I just couldn't let it go, the name. And then also realizing that as a builder, like unless I have a tangible process or an asset, it's actually very difficult to sell a building company. So as I talk to other builders and other people, in our metro area, they're like, no, you have a good last name. My dad would build, my grandpa built, like, it's a known entity. Now is not the time to change your name. And so once that was a hard decision for me to make. Looking on, I mean, how do you, and then once we had clarity, it's like that filter of the brand. Once I finally was able to make a decision and kind of go, now that question has been answered. Like, I won't ask that again. I think probably in my career, I'm like, it's been settled. It's been put to rest.
Yeah.
And now it's kind of full steam ahead on what that brand is.
Right. Well, and I think it was an important exercise to go through, because if you're doubting it for whatever reason, it is important to try to explore things and see, like, does that make sense? Does it make sense to change? And it also sort of opens up the box of saying, like, well, what would make it worth it to do this change? I think you had a lot of brand equity in the Mark D. Williams name because you were Builder of the Year in 2021. Mm-hmm. And that kind of stuff, sort of, if you change names, if you change the look and feel, somebody's going to be like, well, I want to find that builder. It looks like they're out of business.
Right.
And I think that was something that we talked about, which is a little bit like, there is brand equity. There's, SEO. If you talk about search, like, people are going to search for stuff like that. And so you lose a lot of that. I think, when you're making that choice, there should always be a reason for doing a name change. I feel like a rebrand or a refresh, just from a visual standpoint, that can come at various moments in the business. But I think a renaming should have a really strong kind of reason for being. I think whether it's a huge PR crisis where you just need to, like, start fresh, like I said before, which if you're, like, expanding your service area or changing locations where it makes sense, like if something's very local in your name and you need it to be more national or international, that's a reason to do it.
Or you took on a bunch of partners and you went, looking at a law firm, right? It's like, it's like 5 names, and it's like, yeah, I'm just curious, like, why lawyers don't come up with a better way. It's just a bunch of the big long name game.
Right. Well, ad agencies were the same way. Like, Fallon's a guy's name,
Yeah.
Like, it's Pat's last name. So, but yeah, I think there just should be a reason. And I think we explored a lot of those reasons. We, sort of said, let's give it a try. Let's see what we come up with and see if something doesn't beat it or make it feel like that feels so right. And I think we just were like, yeah, actually, you know what? Like, the name is the best.
Which
one.
Again was kind of, it was very validating.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. To kind of go through that process. So that was unique. How often, you just asked, you were speaking, I was thinking of a question here. How often should a company consider rebranding? And I know that the answer is it depends, but just in general, like, what have you seen as, like, an average duration? Because I think brand changes kind of creep up on people. I don't think they realize they need it until it's probably too late.
Right. We talked a little bit about this. I think, of course, there are no hard and fast rules, but there are points in the business where it feels like a change is needed. And I feel like I look at my mission, vision, and values and reassess those every single year. So I kind of look at that and say, like, what am I still aligned with those things? So every single year you can kind of do a review of your brand, just its core thing. But from a visual standpoint, from a refresh, I'm finding that companies that have been in business are solid, that have been around for like 5 or 10 years. Like, that's kind of the range of people who are coming to me.
Yeah.
And so there's a little bit of something where it's just like, it feels dated, or it feels like it's not connecting with the audience that they're currently working with.
And if it's your origin business, right? If you're 5 to 10 years, think how much your business changes in the first 5 to 10 years.
My gosh.
A lot.
It's crazy.
Right.
Yeah. And so a lot of businesses at that point,
because you're finding your voice, right? You're figuring out who your clientele is. I mean,
Right.
the first couple of years, you don't know. I mean, you have an idea. I mean, somebody's your client, but ultimately you don't really know. Maybe I don't have to feel bad about not having a brand from the get-go, because at the end of the day, when you're first starting out, I mean, I started when I was 23. What did I know about brand? What did I know what I was even going to do? You almost need to figure out who you are and what you can do and what your superpower is, as you say it, before you can be like, okay, now let's create a brand around that.
Right. And I think it's interesting because some startups will build their brands first, and they'll like have this product and they'll build the brand around it. And then they find that they have to pivot and change and do something different because of all the learning.
It doesn't fit anymore.
Yeah.
And then they put all this time and money into a brand that isn't really what they do.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So most of the people I work with are established businesses. It's not usually new businesses, because doing branding this way, it's a bit of an investment from a time standpoint, from a money standpoint. There's, you kind of have to know your stuff. And so there's so many resources out there for new businesses that don't require this level of depth of thinking or work. You can really get started so easily with very little now. And I always say that's where you should do. Start somewhere and then like tease it out. And after a few years, then you're going to know so much more about who you're working with, where your real value lies. I think you kind of you can go into business feeling like this is my value. And then a few years later, they're like, actually, that's not quite it. This is more my speed. So
I find that checking in with your clients, obviously, I mean, it goes without saying, but like asking them, I mean, you get some raving clients that are amazing, right? I have this one client, and we're actually probably going to bring him on the podcast because he's a business owner. We'll probably bring him on in season 2, but he is an avid fan of the podcast. And I guess he's been pumping he'll know who I'm talking about when he listens to this podcast. And I'm happy to have you on, Jay. But anyway, he's just an incredible mind, but he's a huge fan of ours, right? And so he just wants to, almost like do a past client podcast interview kind of thing. And we'll probably do some video stuff in the new year, in new year, I guess 24. Yeah, it's only 23. Let's focus on that. But it's anyway, the point of it is just you have your fans who are really, in some ways, they almost know that your brand better than you do because you're in it every day.
Yes.
You kind of lose. It's almost like your own personality. Someone can ask you about yourself and you can say a little bit, but at the end of the day, having someone else talk about you is almost like a third point of view.
Yeah.
I feel like brand management is a little bit like this. Like you extracted the best parts of who our company is and who I am in a way that now we market to people now it's like, we're going to go out and market to the homes that we want to do. Our brand is, uplifted, basically just to go attract the clients that we want to work with.
Well, and when you're working in your business every single day, it's so much and it's so hard to do. And I think even as somebody who helps other people with their brands, it's really hard to do it for myself. Like when you asked about my process, I was like, why don't you talk about that one, Mark? Like you tell everybody about how it works, because I think you have a different viewpoint on it. And I think when every project ends, I try to ask my clients like, okay, what worked, what didn't, what part of the process felt great? Like, what did you not expect? I try to ask a lot of questions because then the person I work with next will get a better experience because I'll understand where the kinks are, but also I'll lean into what really worked and what was really helpful and try to build that up. Because I think, part of being a creative person, and I think you have this too, where and this is going to be the worst thing, but I feel like creative people are naturally curious. Mm-hmm. And I think we ask questions and we look around and we sort of see things happening and we understand like, I think we can fix that. I think we can make that better. I think we can make this process better. I think this is a different idea. I mean, you talk about the little things when you're building the homes, like under the kitchen shelf lighting.
Oh, yes.
Where it's like, it's just little details that like we rethought it because that was sort of like annoying. And so I feel like you're curious about like, how can we solve that? There's got to be a way.
Yeah, I think it comes, what do they say? Was it necessity is the mother of invention?
Totally.
And I also think, but there's also curiosity. I don't know what that saying is. We'll have to create one.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
Curiosity. I don't know. We'll get back to you on that one, people. But because ultimately that light one. So the light what we do is on our custom cabinets, we'll create a light channel. So I brought this idea to my cabinet shop. And I said, hey, here's what I'd like to do. I don't like outlets. I have like a vendetta against outlets. Right. I have beautiful tile. I don't want to see them. So we take the outlets and we hide them in the bottom of the cabinet. So you get other people to help you figure out how to do this, because I certainly don't know. But that idea actually originated. I was down in Naples, Florida, visiting my grandpa, 15 years ago. And I went through this $5-6 million home, whatever it was. And as I was looking at it, the real estate agent pointed out, there was no outlets, and now it's pretty common in high-end homes now here in our market that happens. But at the time, that was the origin for me. And so anyway, for me, I love travel. We have young kids now, so it doesn't seem like I travel. As they get older now, we'll start traveling more and more. But I find I get so much stimulus and creativity out of travel, and it doesn't have to be work travel. That wasn't work travel. It just happened to walk through a house. Well, for whatever reason, it disrupts
your, like, if you're staying in the same route every single day, you start to ignore things and you don't see things around you. It's like the same over and over. Taking yourself out of your everyday environment, even if it's to go visit a grandpa or something like that. I think I'm the same way, where it's travel. It's, literally going on a walk in a different neighborhood is something that sparks different things, because I feel like it makes you more aware.
Do you get used to driving to and from work a similar path. I think it's my restless nature. I try to take a different way home if I'm not late, because then I'm trying to get home as quick as possible. But in general, I do like to take different routes. Now, there's only so many routes home, but especially neighborhoods. I mean, you live in an area, and how many times have you taken a wrong turn, you got on a phone call or MapQuest, there's an accident, and you're like, I didn't even know this neighborhood existed. And I've lived in Minnesota my whole life. And it's like, oh, this is kind of fun. And so I mean, that's just locally. And so I feel the one thing to kind of tangent on that is the thing that I probably enjoyed the most so far, or one of the things that not the most about the podcast interviews that we've had, is that as in talking with other business owners, you mentioned, the curiosity level, but I think it's like I'm getting extracted versions of everyone else's life experience. So here you've been in Europe, you're in London, you're in San Francisco. And so you get all this like melting pot of ideas. And then when you interact, the reason I'm bringing this up is I have this idea that I sort of want to time block Thursday mornings to have coffee with a stranger. And when I say a stranger, maybe somebody you've met, and just to chat about life. Because I find it extremely powerful in the creativity department and kind of just like, you don't know where it's going to lead.
Yeah, I do that. So I have flexible Fridays, I call them. And so every Friday morning.
You have better branding and name that, by the way.
Flexible Fridays.
I do like things that rhyme or like, have
great. You can still flexible Fridays.
Okay.
But every morning I try to like, whether it's going for a coffee and a walk with somebody or just like giving somebody a call that I haven't talked to in a long time, reconnecting with former coworkers.
Out of curiosity, do you actually put that in your calendar as like a reminder to do it at a certain time or a certain time during that day?
I just keep it totally blocked off. So I try to schedule things. So.
But I mean, like what, like just get very specific here, but like on your calendar block or invite to yourself, does it say, what?
It depends what I have planned for that day.
Right.
So I like to schedule in advance, and then it'll be like 9:30 to 10:30 coffee with this person.
Okay.
Or walk with this person.
But I mean, is that Friday booked out now for the rest of the year? Like you have that time slot?
I just keep it open. So I never schedule anything over it. So it's literally, it's blocked as far as like, do not schedule a meeting unless it's something like that.
Understood. Yeah. And I do, the reason I'm getting so specific on this is I have a few things like that. Like I'll have like once a month on a Friday, I'll be like day off with family. And it just allows me not to schedule anything during that day. Or I'll have like, whatever time block. I've actually recently did this because I went to a couple, these coalition summits, which have been incredibly inspiring for me professionally and I guess personally too. But you go to these conferences, you're 3 days, you're learning a ton of information. I had like 35 pages of notes. It's been 8 months ago. I haven't looked at that notebook once since because we're so busy. Now I know that I've done a lot of it because it's been rattling around in my brain. The podcast was from that, a number of other things. But I now, because my schedule is so busy, that I've actually started time blocking 2-hour segments out a couple months from now that just say think on business. So that it's literally planned to stop, have time in your schedule, go and think about the business. Here's the problem. Anytime something comes up or like there's a meeting, it's like that thing gets canceled. And so I'm trying and I'm somewhat successful with it, but I think anyway, it'd be interesting to ask other people too how they do that. It is
hard. And a lot of times it's like, well, that's the only time the client can have this creative presentation. And then it goes away. But as long as it's like, I don't know, the 80-20 rule where it's like 80% of the time that works. And like 20% of the time it's got to get changed. And I think like with any habit, really, it's like most of the time we can make it work. But sometimes you're going to wake up and be like, I just can't do it today. So I don't know. I feel like, but being intentional about that kind of stuff is really important where it's like,
I agree.
I need to step away from the day to day and just think about something else or get a new perspective.
Yeah, or just shut it down. I mean, I think it's important
spend the day sledding with your kids.
Or creating boundaries. I think too. This was something I think I got doing this maybe 3 years ago, and it was I turned off all notifications on my phone. Except for my phone, like when it rings, you actually can't get a hold of me. I got rid of my phone. Smoke signal. I do Navajo blankets and smoke signals. Hopefully it's not a windy day. But the point is like all the dinging, the email alerts. I mean, it's just too much. It's just crazy. And now being a parent and thinking about what I have to do from a media standpoint with our children and how to navigate that, it's sort of overwhelming. And yet I'm as guilty as anybody else. I mean, obviously a big part of our public brand is managing our Instagram, LinkedIn. I mean, it's nonstop. And so sometimes I feel guilty because I try to get on, I post and I try to get off, but you still want to be I don't know if a good steward, but I want to be a good fan of other people. And I am. I mean, you have your 10 or 15 people that you're super fans with. They comment on your stuff, you comment on their stuff. And it's kind of this back and forth that I think is very healthy and very good. But I mean, you could spend your entire day doing that.
Completely. And you find like once you're there, time goes away.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you're like, I just spent 40 minutes scrolling and commenting and liking. And it's like, you could time block that too. I mean,
that's actually probably a good idea. I used to do it early in the morning, but now that's my most productive time. And so, but again, like anything, I'm constantly struggling with how to time block and where.
Totally.
And so I know
that's. Well, and I also think I feel like sometimes I'm like, well, I feel like doing that now, but it's not my time block. So I don't know.
Who is maybe just a few questions as we wrap up here. Who is your ideal client? Like who is a perfect fit for Senn and Sons?
Well, I think, it's definitely a person who's got an established business and really understands what they do and who they serve and who they want to serve. I think companies that are looking to kind of go to the next level are great clients for us because we can help them think through that and how to do that. People who are ready for a rebrand, ready to sort of spend the time thinking about it and really examining kind of their business plans are great clients. I think, when we work with larger clients, it's usually established brands that don't really need a rebrand, but maybe need a refresh of some sort or a campaign that sort of tells a different story. So, yeah.
I love this. I love the story aspect. That really resonates with me because for myself, I find that I can, even just from a memory standpoint, and obviously these are world famous quotes like just do it, right? Yeah. I mean, Nike has got an incredible story, right? But that's actually very interesting to me that the story that's associated with that. And I think, as a small company, you think, well, I can't be like Nike. I can't do that. Yes, you can. I mean, Absolutely. You can have a story. You can have a brand that's just as powerful. It just might be a micro target, or it doesn't matter. It just, if you don't know who your target audience is going to be. And so anyway, I find that refreshing.
Yeah, completely.
People that want to find you, what are your social handles?
So social is at Senn and Sons everywhere, SENN and Sons, now that we have two. So that's great. Yeah. And then senandsons.com.
Okay. Well, and what's new and exciting for anything kind of unusual coming up for this year, or what's we're at the beginning of a year as we're recording this. Any 23 goals here?
Well, I do have goals. So I have a lot of travel goals this year. Last year we took our kids to France for a few weeks, and that trip was amazing. Yeah. And I feel like it was sort of that we're reinvigorated.
Where'd you go?
We went all over. We went to Paris, kind of a smaller town on the east called Deneuve. We trained into Nancy, and then we went south. We drove through Switzerland, ended up in Annecy, which is a beautiful lake in the mountains, Antibes, and Avignon.
Okay. I was in Avignon.
It's my French accent.
Yeah, it's pretty. Oui. Very good. Well, we'll do a travel podcast after this because I can't wait. Well, actually, this summer, the next 2 years, we have quite a few travel plans, and now the kids are getting older. But we won't talk about that on the Curious Builder podcast today. Anyone that wants to listen to more can go to curiousbuilderpodcast.com. We can also check out all the show notes and the website. We'll have all of Kim and Sons social handles as anywhere you want to find her. And thanks again for coming on. And we'll see probably a year from now. We'll have to have her on again because it never gets old talking with you. That went fast.
Love it. Thanks, Mark.
All right. Thanks.